So, solving by the square root method is what we're talking about today. So, up until now we did the quadratic formula, and we wanted our equation to be in standard form. So, you use the square root method if you're in vertex form. Okay? So, remember, vertex form is a x minus h squared plus k, and then we've had it equal to y, but today it's going to equal a number, so we'll say equals 0. So the first thing that we need to know is that squaring something and taking the square root of something are inverses of each other. What does inverse mean? Good, the opposite. So squaring and square rooting are inverses of each other. So that's nice, but what does that mean for us? So that means that they cancel one another out. So they cancel each other out. And we looked at this a little bit the other day when we were simplifying square roots, because remember I told you if you had the square root of 25, we know that 25 is 5 squared, and then we said, well, that square and that square root cancel out, and that's why the answer is just 5. Okay. So we're going to be using that same reasoning today to solve these problems. So let's write some steps. Okay. So the first thing that you're going to do is get the parentheses by themselves. And it's going to be parentheses squared. Still never figured out if itself had one S or two. So, we'll say there's 1.5 S's. So you might have to add, you might have to divide or something like that, but you want to get those parentheses and the squared by itself. Then the second thing you want to do is get rid of that square by square rooting both sides. Okay? And that's why it's called the square root method, because we have to take the square root. Okay? Now, when you take the square root, you have two answers. So you have the positive and the negative answer. Okay? So you're going to set what's left equal to the positive and negative square root. I don't think so. No. Okay. And then you just solve what's left. Okay. So yesterday when we were doing quadratic formula, and when we graphed it the other day, we said that you needed 2 answers. So you have to do this step 3 to get those 2 answers. So set it equal to the positive and to the negative. So if you do the square root of 25, you'll set it equal to 5 and negative 5. Okay, so positive and negative, and that's where we get those 2 answers from. Questions? Alright, let's do one. So let's say we have x plus 5 squared equals 100. Okay. So our first step is to get the parentheses squared by themselves. Is that already done? Yeah, so we don't have to worry about that. So then we can move on to our next step, which is square root both sides. So I'm going to square root this side, and I'm going to square root this side. Okay. So on the left, what happens is this square root and that square cancels out. So then I have x plus 5 equals. Okay, so that square root is gone, and the square is gone. Now I'm looking at that 100. Well, I know I have to do the positive and the negative, so plus or minus 10. Very good. So the square root of 100 is 10. Questions? So then how would I solve for x? Good, so we'll subtract 5 from both sides. Okay. So then that gives me negative 5 plus or minus 10. Okay. So now it looks like what it's been looking like when we were doing quadratic formula. So then we look at it, and can we simplify it again? Yeah, because we can do the adding and the subtracting. So then we can split it and say x equals negative 5 plus 10 and x equals negative 5 minus 10. Okay. Because we got the plus and the minus. So one of our answers, negative 5 plus 10, is 5. And the other one, what's negative 5 minus 10? You got it, negative 15. And that's it. So there's our 2 answers. Questions? Okay. Alright, let's look at another one then. So let's say we have 2 x minus 1 squared plus 5 equals 35. So you don't want to distribute because you have that squared. So the first thing that we want to do is get this parenthesis squared by itself. So what should I do first to do that? well, I can't do that because I have that 2x. Look. Think about if we had 2x plus 5 equals 35. What would be the first thing I do on this one? Minus 5. So we're going to do the same thing on this one. Okay? So you kind of pretend like those parentheses are one little unit. So you can't separate them to begin with. You're just going to solve it. So then that leaves me 2x minus 1 squared equals 30. So then over here I would have 2x equals 30. So then what would I do? Yes, divide. So we want to divide by 2. So same thing over here, we divide by 2. So then we have x minus 1 squared equals 15. Okay? And so we talked about this about, I think it was like last week, but when you have that squared, you don't want to distribute that 2 because of the squared. So remember, you would have to write it out twice and distribute it to the first thing, which you can do, but then you'd have to do quadratic formula, which, again, you would still get the same answer, but this way is a little bit easier once you get the hang of it. Any questions getting to here, though? So at first, you just pretend like those parentheses are an x, and you solve for those. Okay. So now we're on to step 2, and we want to square root both sides. Okay. So again, we do that to get rid of that square. Gone. So now we just have x minus 1 equals, again, we have to have the positive and the negative answer, so plus or minus. Do I know the square root of 15? So it's not a perfect square. If we want to try to break it down, we can. So 2 doesn't go into it, but what does? 3. So 3 and 5, good. And then 5 itself is prime. So do I have any pairs? No. So then it just stays the square root of 15. Okay. Questions on that? No, because you don't have a pair of 3's. So you have to have a pair in order for one of them to come out. Yeah. So it would just stay 3 times 5 inside. Okay. So then our last step, solve for x. What would I do? Plus 1. So then I have 1 plus or minus square root of 15. Could I simplify it any more? No. So we already tried to break down 15 and that didn't work. So we're done. Okay. So just like with the quadratic formula, if you get here, you can't break it down anymore. You just put that whole number out front and go on with your life. Questions? Alright, let's do a little bit tougher one. So let's say we have 2x plus 7 squared equals let's do 27. Okay. So, is our parentheses squared by itself? Yes. So we don't have to move anything yet. The first thing we want to do is get rid of this squared. So square root both sides. So again, we do that to get rid of that square. So now we have 2x plus 7 equals plus or minus, because we got to have the positive and the negative. Do we know the square root of 27? So it's not a perfect square, so we'll just bring it down. But let's see if we can simplify it. So we can put it in its little bracket. And what prime number goes into 27? 3. And 3 goes into it. Good. 9 times. How about 9? 3 again. How many times? 3. Good. And now 3's prime. So 3 and 1. Any questions on this part? I know some of you were out the other day. So do I have a pair? Yeah. Pair of 3's. So 3 comes out. But then this little 3 is all by itself, so he stays inside. Okay. So we do this to rewrite it here. So now I have 2x plus 7 equals, still plus or minus, 3 square root 3. Questions? Alright, how do I solve for x then? So we subtract 7. So 2x equals, again I'm going to put that 7 out front. It really doesn't matter if you put it in the front or in the back. Either way, it means the same thing. And then what will be my last step? You got it, divide by 2. So now if I'm looking at this, 7 divided by 2 is a decimal, 3 divided by 2 is a decimal, so I'm just going to leave it one big fraction. So negative 7 plus or minus 3 square root 3 over 2. And you can have eyes in these problems too. I don't think we have any today, but it is possible. Questions? Okay. Alright, let's do the most tough one with the most steps ever, and then I'll let y'all try something. So let's say we have 3. 5x minus 10 squared plus 7 equals 28. And this right here is as tough as they're going to get. Okay? It has the most steps. So if you can do this one, you are good to go. Okay. So the first thing we have to do is get our parentheses by themselves. So what should I do first if I want to get that by itself? Good. Subtract 7. So then I have 5x minus 10 squared equals 21. Good. So then we have to get rid of that 3, so divide by 3. So 5x minus 10 squared equals 7. Questions? So now, our parentheses are by themselves, so we got to get rid of that square, so square root. So again, we do that to get rid of that little square right there. So then we have 5x minus 10 equals plus or minus, and we don't know the square root of 7, so we bring him down. Now, could I simplify square root of 7? No, because 7 is prime, so that's it. So then I just want to solve for x, so what should I do? Add 10. So again, I'm going to put the 10 out front. It doesn't matter though, wherever you want to put it, as long as you have that plus or minus. And then what would be my last step? You got it. Now, I can do 10 divided by 5, but I can't do square root of 7 divided by 5. So again, I'm just going to leave it a big fraction. And that's it. Any questions? Hopefully easier than quadratic formula? Yes, maybe.